I first noticed it one morning in early spring. The air was still cool, but the dew had already dried on the front steps. I was sipping my coffee, half lost in the haze of my morning routine, when I felt it, not heard, not seen, but felt. A strange vibration beneath the soles of my boots. It wasn't constant. It came in waves, almost like breathing, deep mechanical breathing rising from under the ground. At first, I thought it might just be my imagination. Maybe a distant generator or a nearby lawn crew. But there were no trucks, no leaf blowers, not even birds chirping. Just the quiet hum of suburbia and that pulsing tremor under my lawn. I stepped off the porch and walked slowly across the grass, setting my coffee mug on the edge of the flower bed. The vibration was strongest by the eastern hedge near the big oak tree. I crouched down, pressed my palm to the soil. It buzzed like a lazy wasp trapped in a jar. Most folks would have shrugged it off, but I'm not most folks. See, before I retired, I worked 30 years in pipeline inspection for a major oil and gas firm, one of the big names you hear on the news when something goes horribly wrong. My job was to catch the things that go wrong before they blow up. Corrosion, fatigue, pressure, anomalies, illegal third-party digging, you name it. I've been on sites where a missed vibration like this turned into a crater wide enough to swallow a bus. So no, I wasn't going to shrug this off. The HOA wouldn't like it, though. They didn't like anything that disrupted their little kingdom. I'd moved to Silverbrook Crossing 2 years prior. After losing my wife to cancer, I needed a place quieter than Houston, but not so remote that I couldn't walk to the grocery store. The place looked clean, neat, like something out of a retirement brochure. But beneath the neatly trimmed hedges and matching mailboxes was an HOA with teeth, and its president, Karen Duvall. Karen was exactly what her name conjured: sharp haircut, sharper tongue, and a moral superiority honed like a blade. She once fined a woman $200 for having a lavender bush that disrupted the aesthetic harmony of the community. That lavender bush was planted in memory of the woman's son. Still, I kept my head down, paid dues on time, attended the occasional meeting, until that morning when my lawn started breathing. That night, I did a sweep of the neighborhood. I wasn't trespassing, just walking, listening, feeling. The hum returned in irregular bursts, sometimes faint, sometimes stronger. I noticed it clustered around 3 areas: my yard, the community garden across the street, and most consistently around the HOA clubhouse. That's when I remembered something from my first month here. A contractor's van parked near the clubhouse, unmarked, working after hours. At the time, I thought maybe it was just routine maintenance. Now I wasn't so sure. I went home, opened my file cabinet, and pulled out my old vibration analysis handbook. Buried under years of paperwork was the exact model I used to inspect buried steel. I still had some of my old tools, nothing fancy. Just a handheld geophone and pressure gauge, but enough to get a feel for things. I'd always kept them more out of nostalgia than utility. Guess it was time to dust them off. The next morning, I was kneeling by my eastern hedge geophone, pressed into the dirt, when I heard footsteps on gravel. "You planning to dig up your yard?" Mr. Bennett came a clipped voice behind me. Karen. She was standing by the sidewalk, arms folded, wearing her usual pressed polo, and that red HOA badge she liked to flash like a sheriff's star. Her lips were tight, like she was already annoyed with me. "Just checking for moles," I said without looking up. "Moles," she echoed flat. "Big ones," I said, tapping the geophone gently, "with steel jackets and pressure faults." She didn't laugh. She rarely did. This community has specific rules about unauthorized landscaping. If you're thinking of trenching or installing anything, you'll need board approval and permits. "Not planning on digging, Karen," I said, standing. "Just listening." She stepped closer, peering at my equipment. "What exactly is that?" "Old friend from work." She squinted, clearly irritated that I wasn't giving her a straight answer. "Well, whatever it is, I'd suggest you stop before people get the wrong idea. We've had concerns in the past about overstepping personal property boundaries. You wouldn't want to start a rumor, would you?" There it was. The warning wrapped in neighborhood courtesy. The HOA's signature move. I smiled politely. Of course not. Just enjoying the quiet. She lingered a moment longer, then walked off, clipboard swinging at her side like a weapon. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed with the windows open, listening. And around midnight I heard it again. The humming, louder this time. And beneath it, something new. A faint gurgle, like water under pressure moving through a pipe too narrow or too old. That was when I knew. Something down there was failing. They wouldn't believe me, not yet. But something was coming, and I'd be damned if I let them bury it literally or figuratively. The HOA meeting was held in the community clubhouse every second Thursday of the month. You had to RSVP online. You had to sign in at the door. You had to sit in one of the identical gray chairs lined up like they were expecting a sermon. The whole place reeked of control and lemon pledge. That night I showed up early, not because I wanted a front row seat, but because I didn't want Karen spinning the narrative before I could speak. I brought my binder. Inside annotated maps of pipeline routes, old photos I'd taken of the contractor vans, a few preliminary notes from my geophone readings. Nothing official, nothing public record. But enough to make someone pay attention. Or so I thought. When my name was called during the open comment period, I stood up and walked to Mike on the podium. Karen gave me that tight smile of hers, the one that said, "I've already decided this doesn't matter, but let's hear it anyway." "Good evening." I started, keeping my tone even. "I'm Tom Bennett, 42 Rolling Creek Lane. I've lived here just over 2 years. I wanted to bring up a concern about underground infrastructure near my property, specifically some vibrations I've been tracking for the past week." Some people shifted in their seats. A few turned to look at Karen. Her smile didn't move. I continued. "I used to work in pipeline safety. Based on what I'm detecting, there's consistent mechanical resonance under several parts of the neighborhood near my yard, the community garden, and especially around this clubhouse. I'm worried we may have a degraded line down there, possibly corroded piping or poor insulation." I paused, waited. Karen leaned forward, her elbows resting on the lacquered table in front of her. "Mr. Bennett," she said loud enough for the microphone to catch every syllable, "are you suggesting there's some kind of malfunction beneath our community grounds?" "I'm suggesting," I replied, "that we have reason to investigate. If there's a utility line, water, gas, anything aging or improperly maintained, it could pose a serious risk." "And what makes you believe you're qualified to determine that?" she asked. "I spent 3 decades in the field. I've investigated post-incident sites where people died because someone ignored signs just like this." Karen's smile faded. She straightened her posture like a cobra rising from a basket. "With all due respect," she said, "this community is built to code. All infrastructure is city permitted and up to date. And if you're detecting vibrations, perhaps you should check your home appliances." A few soft chuckles floated from the back of the room. One guy, the HOA treasurer, I think, snorted into his soda. My jaw tightened, but I held steady. "I'm not here to grandstand," I said. "I'm asking the board to allow a professional inspection. I'll even pay for the preliminary scan myself." Karen's eyes narrowed. "You want to dig on HOA property? That's not how this works. Our land, our rules." "I don't want to dig anything," I said calmly. "There are non-invasive diagnostic tools. Sonar, EM pulse mapping, even thermal variance scans. I can make a few calls. We don't authorize private investigations on common land," she snapped, "and we especially don't entertain conspiracy theories at public meetings." There was a moment of silence, heavy and awkward. "I'm trying to prevent a disaster," I said, voice low now. "You think this is about attention? I've seen what happens when people wait too long. This isn't paranoia, it's prevention." Karen leaned toward the mic again. Noted, she said, tone clipped and final. "The board will consider your concerns and respond appropriately. Is there anything else?" I stood there staring at her binder, still in my hands. She didn't look back. I turned, walked back to my seat. No applause, no questions. Just the quiet rustle of khaki slacks and crossed arms, people looking at me like I'd just accused Santa Claus of arson. After the meeting, I approached her at the back table, where she was collecting name badges. "Karen," I said, "you can at least take the binder." She didn't look up. "You're bordering on harassment, Mr. Bennett." I blinked. "I'm offering data." "You're stirring fear," she said. "If you persist, we will issue a formal warning for disruption and misinformation." That stopped me cold. A warning. "We have rules," she said, meeting my eyes now. "This isn't your oil field anymore." Then she turned her back and walked away. I stood there for another 30 seconds before heading for the exit. 1 or 2 neighbors looked my way, then quickly looked away again. I was radioactive now. I got home and put the binder on the kitchen table. I stared at it for a long time. Karen didn't care. The board didn't care. The neighborhood didn't care. I wasn't part of the machine. I was the rust on its gears. Later that night, I stepped out back, lit a cigarette I shouldn't have lit, and walked barefoot onto the lawn. The vibration was still there. Faint, uneven, Wrong. I looked up at the clubhouse just visible over the rooftops. All dark now. Silent. But beneath it something was very much awake. I knew the signs. And I wasn't letting this go. Not now. Not when I could still stop what was coming. The following Sunday started like any other quiet, bright, painfully suburban. Lawn mowers buzzed. Sprinklers hissed across perfectly green lawns. Families gathered at the clubhouse for the monthly pancake brunch the HOA hosted to build community spirit. I stayed home. I'd had enough of their community spirit. But while sipping my black coffee from the back porch, I saw it. A white panel van. No company markings, no license plates on the front, just a small green, magnetic sticker that said, Utility Survey Crew. It pulled into the access lane behind the clubhouse, stopping at a chain-link gate normally locked for landscaping equipment. A man in a reflective vest climbed out, walked around, and opened the gate with a key. Not a universal utility key. No, this was a private key, HOA issued. I stood up, grabbed my phone, and started walking. There were no sidewalks on that rear access path, just gravel and worn grass. I approached slowly like a jogger cooling down. The man was kneeling near a maintenance hatch, fiddling with something under a lid painted to match the turf. Morning, I said casually. He looked up startled. Hey, sorry, I shouldn't take long. No worries, I said. Gas or water? Gas, he answered too quickly. I glanced at his clipboard covered in HOA letterhead. Not the city seal. Not the county. You work for the city, I asked. He hesitated. Contracted through a vendor. Private inspection. I nodded slowly. Right. He shifted, clearly uneasy now. Do you live around here? Yeah, I said. Right on Rolling Creek. Which makes this my concern. The man stood dusting his gloves. Sorry, sir. I've got to keep working. I stepped back, gave him space, but took note of everything. The markings he sprayed on the grass in orange and yellow paint. The long probe he stuck into the dirt. The way he held his ear to it and waited. I recognized the method. A leak detection test for pressure loss. But he wasn't taking any real readings. His scanner wasn't even powered on. He was faking it. That night, I dug deeper. I went online searching for public permits tied to the HOA's parcel. According to the city records, the only recent approval for underground work was 3 years old. A drainage line repair behind the clubhouse. Nothing about gas lines, pressurized systems, or structural retrofits. I cross-referenced utility easement maps and stormwater layouts. What I found didn't make sense. The clubhouse was sitting directly above what should have been a sealed section of conduit, an old private gas feeder line from decades ago. Long since decommissioned, when the subdivision modernized. Except it hadn't been removed, just rerouted. At 2:14 a.m., bleary-eyed and furious, I called up an old friend of mine, Manny, a field investigator with the State Public Utilities Commission. He was half asleep, but when I explained the signs, the vibration, the pressure noise, the unpermitted activity, his tone changed. You think they're using an uninspected pressure line? He asked. I think they bypassed the city system to save money, I said. And now they're sitting on a pressurized ghost line under a public building. Manny cursed. That's criminal negligence if true. I need proof, I said. They won't give it to me. They've threatened legal action. He paused. I'll see what I can pull from the permit back end. But you're going to have to tread carefully. HOA boards don't like it when you shine a light under the floorboards. I thanked him and hung up. I couldn't sleep after that. The next day, I took a walk past the community garden where the pipeline trail continued. My foot sank slightly into the earth near a corner plot. I looked down. A faint patch of yellowed grass, shaped like a crescent marking the exact path of a buried line. I knelt, pressing my palm to the ground. The vibration was stronger here. I stood, turned around, and saw Karen watching me from across the cul-de-sac. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. Just stood there motionless like a portrait of suspicion. Later that evening, I received a certified letter. It was from the HOA. Dear Mr. Bennett, it has come to our attention that you have engaged in unauthorized surveillance and speculation regarding community infrastructure. Be advised that the HOA considers this behavior disruptive and potentially defamatory. Should you continue these actions, legal proceedings will be initiated under the neighborhood covenant clauses related to harassment, slander, and community interference. Sincerely, Silverbrook Crossing HOA Board. They were trying to shut me down legally, emotionally, publicly. But I wasn't rattled. I was pissed. I had spent my career protecting people from exactly this kind of reckless shortcutting. I had stood over smoking craters where someone's cost-saving measure had taken lives. I had watched parents cry over charred shoes that once held the feet of children. And now Karen wanted me to shut up and smile so she could preserve her power. No, not this time. That night, I called Manny again. I want to report a suspected violation, I said, and I'm willing to put my name on it. You sure? He asked. This gets real fast. Legal action inspections, shutdowns. You'll be public enemy number 1. I stared out my front window at the darkened clubhouse. I've been here before, I said. They don't scare me. What scared me was what would happen if I did nothing. The pipeline wasn't just unstable. It was a loaded gun. And these people were treating it like lawn decor. The HOA liked to think of me as just another grumpy retiree with too much time on his hands. That was their mistake. They saw the gray hair and quiet demeanor and assumed I spent my days worrying about grass height or which neighbors left their garbage bins out too long. But they didn't know what I used to do for a living, or why I quit. Back in the 90s and early 2000s, I worked for Hensley and Bratt Infrastructure Solutions, one of the largest private contractors maintaining oil and gas pipeline systems across the Midwest and Southwest. My specialty wasn't just inspection, it was failure analysis. My job began after things went wrong. Explosions, collapses, underground ruptures that tore through highways or suburban cul-de-sacs. I would walk into chaos, step over fire hoses and crater edges, and dig into the why behind each failure. I read steel like other people read palms. There's a look in people's eyes when they realize someone should have listened. It stays with you. It stayed with me. My final job before retirement was outside Amarillo. A rural line had gone unchecked for nearly a decade. We found signs of corrosion years earlier, electrochemical pitting minor, but spreading. But the client refused a full replacement. They patched it, delayed, cut corners. When it finally blew, it leveled a farmhouse and killed a mother and her 2 sons. I met the husband at the site. He didn't yell, didn't blame. He just stared at the still smoking pit where his life used to be and said, I knew it. That night, I typed my resignation letter. I thought moving to Silverbrook Crossing would give me peace, some quiet, some healing. I was wrong. After the threat letter from the HOA, I knew I had to push harder but smarter. I couldn't get into their records. I didn't have subpoena power or a warrant. But what I did have was an understanding of pressure systems and how to document signs of failure better than any clipboard Karen could imagine. So I started a logbook. Every morning I'd walk the same route. My yard, the community garden, the eastern sidewalk behind the clubhouse. I brought my handheld geophone, wrapped in an old lunchbox cooler so I wouldn't draw attention. I recorded timestamps, vibration levels, intensity of resonance, even ambient temperature. I logged the changes day by day, and they were getting worse. The pressure sounds were growing sharper, shorter intervals, rhythmic bursts of expansion and contraction. Classic signs of internal stress. If it was gas, it meant a pressure regulator was malfunctioning. If it was water or sewer, it meant a blockage was forming, pressure building, nowhere to go. But the real clue came 2 weeks later during a hot streak in June. The air was thick and still, like a held breath. I walked past the clubhouse at 7:15 a.m. and nearly missed it, a hairline fracture along the concrete base of the west garden wall. Not much, just a slim diagonal crack about a 1/4 inch wide, running from the base toward the drainage channel. I crouched down and touched it. Warm. Concrete doesn't get warm like that unless something beneath it is radiating heat. If it was a water line, it would have been cool. If it was sewer, neutral. But heat, that pointed to gas or electrical systems under strain. And this crack meant subtle soil displacement, likely caused by a shallow expansion of something pressurized underground. This wasn't just theory anymore. It was happening. That evening, I compiled my readings into a neat PDF. I included photos, diagrams, and written observations. I sent it not to the HOA, but to Manny. I knew he couldn't act officially without jurisdiction, but he promised to escalate it to the State Utility Risk Evaluation Team. 2 days later, he called. I showed your data to my supervisor, he said. She's concerned. especially the surface temperature and vibration delta. She wants to send a junior inspector for an unofficial look. When I asked, "Tomorrow, discreetly. Tell him to bring a multi-gas detector and a thermal scanner," I said, "and to watch for HOA board members lurking with clipboards." He laughed. "You're serious? You have no idea." The inspector arrived just after sunrise. A 20-something guy named Joel, clean-shaven with boots that hadn't seen a proper site yet. He looked nervous. I met him at the edge of the trail near the clubhouse fence. We pretended to jog together, looping around the perimeter, pausing only where I had marked key sites with small chalk dots on the curb. Joel crouched down, pulled out a portable gas sniffer, and scanned along the base of the clubhouse wall. It beeped. Then it beeped again. Higher reading. He frowned. Low levels of methane. Could be organic decay, but this isn't high vegetation soil. Exactly, I said. And methane doesn't build like that unless it's leaking. He continued scanning. The handheld thermal sensor showed a narrow line of increased surface temperature, about 5 degrees warmer than the surrounding soil, running in a straight path toward the community garden. Pipeline, I said. Undocumented, maybe even retrofitted. Joel nodded. This isn't normal. He took pictures, logged coordinates, and shook my hand. I'll submit this quietly. But off the record, this is sketchy as hell. As he walked away, I spotted Karen again standing by the HOA mailbox cluster, watching with that same thin-lipped glare. This time I waved. She didn't wave back. The next morning, a formal notice appeared on my doorstep. A $500 fine for unauthorized surveillance of common areas and harassment of community vendors. I laughed out loud. They were panicking, and that meant I was getting close. It happened just before dawn on a Wednesday. I'd barely slept the night before. Too much tension in my chest, too much pacing across the floorboards. The hum beneath my yard had grown stronger over the last 2 days, faster, tighter, like a machine revving toward a red line. Joel's findings only confirmed what I'd already known deep in my bones. We weren't sitting on theory anymore. We were sitting on a bomb. At 5:42 a.m., I stepped outside into the cool morning air wrapped in my old flannel robe. The sky was still ink dark, the silence broken only by a soft breeze moving through the hedges. But something was wrong. The air smelled off. It wasn't gas exactly, too faint for that, but there was a bitterness to it, a sharpness I hadn't noticed before. It caught in the back of my throat like copper and rot. I walked down the drive across the street and toward the community garden, and that's when I saw it. A line of scorched grass, cutting a perfect curve across the west side of the garden, yellow, dry, brittle to the touch. It hadn't been there yesterday. The shape matched the heat trail I'd mapped from Joel's thermal readings, but now the effects were visible to the naked eye. The soil was dying. I crouched and pressed my palm into the ground, same as I'd done weeks ago. It was hot. Not warm. Hot. The kind of heat that meant active chemical activity, underground friction combustion, or pressure-driven leaks. Gas. I snapped pictures, video. I recorded myself speaking, time-stamped the footage, backed it all up to a cloud drive. Then I walked directly back to my house, pulled out the printout of the HOA's last threat letter, and scrawled across it in red ink. Documented proof of active leak 5:42 a.m. Garden perimeter. I slipped it into a new envelope and taped it to the clubhouse door before 6:15 a.m. I made sure the security camera above the entrance caught me doing it. No one could accuse me of sneaking around. I wanted them to see. By 9:30, I had a voicemail from Karen. "Mr. Bennett, we received your message. I must remind you again that any further acts of unauthorized inspection or intimidation will be met with formal legal action. Please cease immediately." She sounded rattled. The cold control in her voice was cracking. By noon, maintenance crews had arrived at the community garden. Same unmarked white vans, same men in blank vests, but this time, they brought excavation gear. I watched from my upstairs window as they opened the ground exactly where I'd documented the burn line. They weren't just checking the soil, they were digging. I grabbed my camera and started filming. As they worked, I saw one of the men wave frantically, calling over the others. They backed away. One of them pulled out a portable sniffer, same model Joel had used. He swept it over the exposed dirt. It blinked red, once, twice. Then they pulled the plug. No warning, no formal notification, just fast panicked movement. They filled the hole, halfway packed it hastily, and left the site by 300 p.m. I knew that drill. They'd found a leak. And instead of reporting it to the city or shutting down the flow like protocol demanded, they'd tried to bury it. That night, I forwarded the footage to Joel. He called me 5 minutes later. "You said they dug without permits." "I've got video," I said. "Full excavation active response. At least one positive detection." He swore. "That's illegal. If they're touching a pressurized system without notification, they're in violation of 4 separate statutes. And if it's gas, that's a public endangerment charge." "Are you going to act?" "I don't have to," he said. "I sent your data up the chain last week." "You were right." That line beneath the clubhouse, it was decommissioned in 1998 and wasn't supposed to be active, but someone tapped into it illegally. The air went cold around me. "They've been piping gas through a ghost line for over a decade," Joel said. "And no one knows who signed off on it." "I do," I said quietly. "Karen. Or someone on her board. Someone cut corners. Someone wanted to save HOA money and avoid the city's rising rates, so they reactivated an old forgotten artery under the clubhouse, hoping no one would notice. Until I did. "Get ready," Joel said. "We're sending an official team tomorrow. You might want to stay out of the way." "Not a chance," I replied. At 6:00 p.m., I walked down to the garden again. The excavation site was roughly packed with fresh sod thrown over the top like a rushed burial. A sign had been stuck in the dirt. "Routine landscaping. Please keep off." I laughed bitterly. They were still pretending, still hoping no one would see the smoke pouring from under the doorframe. At home, I opened my binder again, added a new page. Leak number 1 confirmed. Scorched vegetation. Gas detected. Evidence buried. I inserted a printed photo from my phone of the burn line cutting through the soil. Then I closed it, locked the cover with its faded brass latch, and leaned back. They wouldn't stop. Not until something forced their hand. And by then I feared it might be too late. Because the ground wasn't just humming anymore. It was groaning. The certified envelope arrived 2 days after the leak. No return address, just a gold HOA sticker slapped onto the corner like a smug little signature. I recognized the typeface before I even opened it. The same faux formal Times New Roman they used for every newsletter, fine notice, and threat wrapped in politeness. Inside was a 3-page letter stapled and stamped with official-looking language that tried hard to sound civil but failed spectacularly. The message was crystal clear. "Mr. Bennett, your ongoing interference with Silverbrook Crossing HOA operations, including unapproved inspections, dissemination of false information, and harassment of contracted personnel, has violated multiple provisions of our community charter. Effective immediately, you are being assessed a $1,200 fine for unauthorized access to common areas. A cease and desist demand regarding any further engagement with HOA infrastructure. A formal warning that legal action will be pursued if behavior persists. Failure to comply may result in a lien against your property." There it was, the nuclear option. A lien, over a leak. They weren't trying to scare me anymore. They were trying to break me. I sat at the kitchen table with the letter between my hands, staring at the words like they might rearrange into something sane. But no, they were doubling down. Burying truth beneath threats. And if I hadn't known better, I might have been shaken. That's how HOAs worked. They didn't need to be right. They just needed to be relentless. And they counted on people folding to the pressure. But I'd buried friends. I'd walked the scorched outlines of explosions. I'd seen what happens when people ignore the early warnings. If they thought this letter would silence me, they'd forgotten what happens when a man has nothing left to lose but his name. I picked up my phone and called Manny. "They hit you with a lien notice already?" he asked, incredulous. "Threatened one," I said. "And a fine." Jesus. I heard typing on the other end. He was digging, fast. "Okay," he said. "I can escalate this. I already submitted our field report to the state board. They've flagged the area. It's in pre-investigation. But until something actually ruptures or causes measurable public harm, it's considered low priority." "What about the ghost line?" "Still no ownership confirmation," Manny said. "Your HOA's utility arrangements are buried under 5 layers of private contractors. But we're on to it." "Can I release the report?" I asked. He hesitated. "Technically, no. But if a copy found its way to the media or city council, I wouldn't stop you. I didn't need more. That night, I created a Dropbox folder with everything, as my vibration logs with timestamps. Joel's thermal photos. The garden leak images. A video of the unmarked crew digging up the active leak. A scanned copy of the HOA's threat letter. And finally, a recorded voice memo of myself calmly explaining the entire situation as if giving sworn testimony. I titled it, Silverbrook Crossing Pipeline Dossier, for public record. Then I emailed it to 3 people, one at the city council member for our district who I'd met once at a town hall. 2. A local investigative journalist from Channel 7 News who'd recently reported on zoning scandals. 3. A friend from my old job, who now consulted for a safety oversight nonprofit. By midnight, I received 2 replies. The journalist wanted to speak in person, off the record first, on the record later. And my old friend Mark replied with a single line. This is damning. I'll send it to my EPA contact. By morning, the fuse had been lit, but the HOA didn't know that yet. They still believed I was just an old man in over his head. So at 10:03 a.m., I received an email from Karen herself. Subject final warning. Action required. Mr. Bennett, it has come to the board's attention that you have distributed unauthorized and defamatory information regarding community infrastructure. If these falsehoods are not retracted immediately, we will initiate legal proceedings for slander, libel, and interference with contractual operations. Your property status within Silverbrook Crossing may also be reviewed for compliance penalties. My blood went cold at the final line. On your property status. The implication was clear: expulsion, lien, foreclosure even. I marched down to the HOA office and banged the door twice before walking in. Karen was inside, seated at her usual corner desk, hands folded over a stack of papers like a politician mid-photo op. 2 other board members sat nearby, flanking her like well-dressed gargoyles. Mr. Bennett, she said without standing, you're trespassing. No, I'm responding, I said, placing a printed copy of the Dropbox link on the table. Her eyes scanned it. What's this? Everything I've collected. Every reading. Every photo. Your illegal dig. The leak you pretended wasn't there. And the letter threatening to put a lien on my house for catching your negligence. One of the men shifted uncomfortably. Karen's jaw clenched. You've made a serious mistake, she said coolly. I know, I replied. I moved into the wrong neighborhood. Then I turned to leave. Before I got to the door, Karen spoke again. You're going to regret this, she called after me. You'll be liable for every consequence of spreading misinformation. I paused. No, I said without turning. You will. And then for the first time since this began, I smiled. Because I knew what was coming. Not from me, not from threats or angry letters, but from beneath their feet. The ground was swelling. The leak was growing. And sooner or later, the pipeline would make itself heard. 2 days after the HOA's last threat, a state-marked sedan rolled slowly through Silverbrook Crossing at 6:38 a.m. It didn't stop at the gates. It didn't announce its arrival. But I recognized the emblem on the side instantly. Texas State Public Utilities Commission, and I knew Manny had come through. I'd left a folded lawn chair out by the sidewalk, same place I sat every morning now. Mug in one hand, clipboard in the other, pretending to log bird sightings while watching the neighborhood unravel from the ground up. The inspector's name was Elaine Prater. Late 30s, sharp bob haircut, cargo pants, and boots that had seen more than HOA potlucks. She walked with purpose, carrying a worn-out Pelican case and a GPS tablet. You Bennett, she asked, flipping open a notepad without waiting for confirmation. Yes, ma'am. I've reviewed your logs. We're initiating a Tier 2 surface-level integrity assessment on the corridor from the clubhouse to the north drainage zone. That includes the garden, the back lawn, and the suspected junction under the east pedestrian trail. Do you need HOA permission? I asked, already knowing the answer. She looked up. They're not a recognized utility operator. That line was never permitted for private residential gas distribution, which means they're trespassing on regulated infrastructure. So no, we don't need their damn permission. I almost laughed. Elaine got to work fast. By 7:20, her team, 2 younger techs in navy blue polos, were scanning the area with ground-penetrating radar and high-frequency sonar. I trailed nearby, trying not to hover, but close enough to see the screen when it pulsed. The first anomalies showed up in under 10 minutes. Section of warped metal at 1.7 meters depth, too close to the surface for pressurized flow. A heat signature that pulsed erratically. Not typical for insulated lines. And most damning, a direct gas leak registering 78 ppm methane concentration at the edge of the garden. "Holy hell," one of the techs muttered. "This thing's bleeding." Elaine radioed for escalation. Within an hour, an orange barricade had been placed around the entire back lot of the clubhouse. A formal stop work order was duct-taped to the maintenance door. At 9:03 a.m., Karen arrived. She stormed across the parking lot in heels and a salmon-colored blouse, holding her phone like a weapon. I saw her yelling before she even reached the barricade. Elaine didn't flinch. "This is a public overstep," Karen barked. "You're trespassing on HOA-managed property." Elaine calmly reached into her coat, pulled out a laminated warrant, and held it up. "Ma'am, this investigation falls under state jurisdiction. You are not a certified utility provider. Your board is under review for unpermitted connection to legacy gas infrastructure." Karen's face changed, just for a flicker. This is a mistake, she tried. "We contracted licensed professionals." Elaine cut her off. "None of whom pulled city permits. We've confirmed. You reactivated a defunct feeder line without authorization. That line is over 30 years old and was decommissioned due to risk of rupture under soil shift. I demand this be halted immediately." "Do that," Elaine said, "and you'll be obstructing a state safety investigation." Karen's mouth opened, then closed. Her face flushed a deep, furious red. I stood a few yards back, arms folded, watching it all play out. Elaine turned and motioned to her team. "Open the site." The techs began digging with precision tools, unearthing a patch of soil exactly where I documented the hums and heat signatures. The dirt gave way easily. Too easily. That's when the smell hit a sharp, sour tang of bought gasoline and metal. Moments later, the corroded pipe came into view. It was as bad as I feared. Pitted, rusted, discolored. Held together in one section with what looked like a makeshift plastic sleeve zip-tied around a fracture, sealed with a thick coat of rubber cement. A grotesque shortcut. Something no licensed contractor would ever approve. Elaine stepped back, exhaled slowly. "We've got probable cause," she said into her radio, requesting immediate pipeline shutoff authorization. Karen was still there, silent now, frozen, watching her kingdom crack open. One of the techs looked at me and nodded. "You were right." I didn't smile. There was nothing to celebrate, not yet, because when the call came through to shut off the line, the command center confirmed something horrifying. Pressure regulators non-responsive, flow control override not detected, manual shutoff required at junction hub location unknown. In layman's terms, they had no control. Someone likely years ago had rigged the system without any functional shutoff valve. The gas was still flowing, still pressurizing, still building toward something. Elaine turned to Karen. "Where's the original installer? Who did the retrofit?" Karen stammered. We... Names, Elaine said. "Now." Karen blinked. "It was before my term. The previous board. They said it was approved." Elaine's eyes narrowed. "That line is a live hazard. If we don't locate the control valve soon, it won't be your term we're discussing. It'll be your liability in court." By midday, a full evacuation notice had been issued for the clubhouse and the 6 homes closest to the leak zone. Families stood outside with their pets and phones, confused, scared. Some were angry, others were crying. And still, not a single official message from the HOA. I walked to the center of the cul-de-sac and spoke. "You're all in danger," I said. "This pipeline is unstable." The HOA knew. They were warned. They silenced it. "But the state's here now, and it's going to blow if they don't find that valve." Silence. And then from somewhere near the back, applause on one man, then 2. Then an elderly woman who I remembered from the lavender bush incident. "You warned them," she said. "You tried." I didn't answer. I just looked at the ground beneath our feet. It was trembling again, like a warning or a countdown. The explosion didn't come with a warning. It didn't give us the decency of a siren or a countdown. It came the way bad things often do, suddenly, violently, and with the unmistakable finality of something that should never have been allowed to exist. It was 4:12 p.m. The state team had spent the entire day scanning every inch of the easement corridor. They'd brought in a new crew, 5 more inspectors in hard hats, and reflective vests equipped with advanced leak detectors and soil displacement monitors. Elaine had called for the city's emergency response unit. Streets were cordoned off. Electricity was cut to the clubhouse and its surrounding amenities. Gas utility trucks were parked along the southern boundary. But still, no one could find the shutoff valve. At 3:50, they unearthed a partial junction box behind the clubhouse. It was corroded, filled with rust and mud. The handle snapped clean off. There was no readable serial number, no access code, and worse, no control. The team radioed in. Box is dead. Doesn't respond to manual override. System appears hacked or bypassed. I was standing in my front yard with binoculars watching everything unfold. Neighbors were gathered in groups on porches and sidewalks, whispering, texting, pointing at the yellow tape that ran around the entire community green space. No one had been told the full truth yet, just words like gas concern, precautionary closure, and isolated incident. But I knew. Manny knew. Elaine knew. This wasn't isolated. It was systemic. And then it happened. At first, it sounded like thunder. A deep rumble that came from the earth itself, rolling beneath our feet, rattling windows and nerves. Some people looked up instinctively, expecting a storm. But I knew better. The ground beneath the clubhouse heaved. I saw the roof lift, almost float for a split second, then a white-orange burst of flame tore through the center of the building. The windows shattered outward like shotgun blasts. A bloom of smoke and fire erupted skyward with a concussive roar that knocked me backward even from across the street. The shock wave hit hard, gut punch loud, a split second of silence after the blast, as if the world forgot how to breathe. Then screams. The clubhouse roof caved in, collapsing in a spray of sparks and splintered timber. Glass and stucco rained down over the manicured lawn. Fire licked its way along the mulch beds, chasing the gas line like a fuse. And somewhere beneath it all, the pipeline kept hissing. Still alive, still feeding the inferno. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding, ears ringing. I could barely hear the panicked shouting around me. People were running, parents dragging children, residents leaping into cars, others frozen in place as smoke curled into the blue sky like a black flag raised in surrender. I looked toward Karen's house. She stood on her porch, her face, pale mouth open. She didn't move. Couldn't. She just stared at the carnage like she couldn't comprehend that it was real, that this was happening, that it was her clubhouse, her crown jewel, now reduced to a burning crater. Emergency sirens began to howl in the distance. Fire trucks, ambulances, police cruisers. The neighborhood was now a disaster zone. Elaine was already barking into her radio. We have a full rupture. Multiple secondary leaks. Call gas utility control. This is now a level 3 containment emergency. Immediate suppression required. Her team worked like a machine, unfurling foam hoses, sealing perimeter valves, deploying gas snuffers. But they weren't fighting just a fire. They were fighting years of negligence. And in those few minutes after the explosion, something else broke. The illusion of control. The HOA had wielded like a scepter. The people who once feared fines and citations now feared fire and smoke, and the raw, ugly truth of what the board had allowed to fester beneath their feet. The crowd turned on Karen fast. "You covered this up," someone shouted. "You fined him for catching it," yelled another. "You almost got us all killed." Karen didn't respond. She still hadn't moved. A woman, Janine, the one with the lavender bush Karen had once had removed, stepped toward her. "You ignored the warnings," she said, trembling. "You called him crazy." Karen's eyes blinked rapidly. I didn't know it was that serious." "Yes, you did," Janine said coldly. "You just didn't care." Police officers arrived and immediately moved to secure the scene. Elaine, covered in soot and sweat, walked toward the main assembly of neighbors. Her voice cut through the panic like a scalpel. "The structure is compromised. We're securing the leak. All residents within a 100-yard radius need to evacuate. If you have a shelter-in-place plan, activate it now." I stood next to her, and for a moment, she turned and nodded at me, not as a bureaucrat, but as a human being. An acknowledgement that everything I'd warned about had come true. By nightfall, the fire was under control. What remained of the clubhouse was a scorched shell. The foundation ruptured, the lawn charred black like war-zone footage. Utility crews worked under floodlights, isolating the remaining flow paths. Hazmat teams scoured the air for toxicity. Reporters began to gather outside the gates. And the HOA, They were nowhere to be seen, except Karen. She sat on the curb beneath a flickering streetlight, arms wrapped around herself, eyes red but dry. I walked past her on my way home. She didn't look at me. She didn't say a word. I didn't stop, because this wasn't my victory. It was just the truth finally clawing its way to the surface. And the ground beneath us, it wasn't humming anymore. It was silent. Like it too was finally done pretending. The morning after the explosion, the neighborhood woke to silence, not the kind that soothes, but the kind that presses against your chest like grief. There were no sprinklers running, no dogs barking, no garage doors humming open, just the low drone of generator trucks and the flutter of yellow caution tape around what used to be the heart of Silverbrook Crossing. And just like that, the HOA's power evaporated. Within 24 hours, Channel 7 aired a breaking segment headlined, "Underground Pipeline Explosion Exposes HOA Negligence, Dozens Evacuated." The footage was brutal. Drone shots of the blast crater. Interviews with residents who had no idea a pressurized gas line ran under their garden plots. And then, clear as day, video stills of my leak photos time-stamped 2 weeks before the incident. A homeowner raised concerns about vibrations and surface heat anomalies, and was fined and threatened with legal action for speaking out. The image cut to Karen smiling in a file photo taken at one of her signature HOA brunches. The anchor's voiceover was calm, almost surgical. The board president, Karen Duvall, is now under investigation for suppressing infrastructure complaints and illegally authorizing excavation on a sealed utility line. That night, someone spray-painted, "He warned you," on the crumbled brick sign in front of the clubhouse ruins, in white block letters. They didn't mean me by name, but they didn't have to. The next day, my phone rang nonstop. Reporters, attorneys, neighbors, strangers from across the country. But the one call I'll never forget came from old Karen herself. She didn't open with hello. She didn't try to apologize. All she said was, "You've destroyed everything." I didn't speak. "And do you think they'll care that you were right? The lawsuits are piling up. My husband had to hire a separate attorney. The board's finished. I can't even go to the grocery store." Still, I said nothing. "Why couldn't you just let it go?" she asked, her voice cracking. And finally I answered, "Because you knew. You had every warning, every chance. And instead of listening, you weaponized your authority to protect your image." There was silence on the other end. "You didn't lose control," I said. "You never had it to begin with." She hung up. I set the phone down and exhaled. Not satisfaction, not revenge, but relief. The kind that seeps into your bones when the weight you've carried finally gets acknowledged, not just by people, but by the truth itself. Over the next few weeks, everything fell apart for the HOA. And the state's investigation concluded. The line had been illegally tapped 12 years ago under the direction of a previous board, but reactivated and maintained during Karen's tenure. The insurance company pulled coverage, citing undisclosed hazardous infrastructure. Residents began filing class action suits, not just for property damage, but for emotional distress exposure to risk and suppression of safety complaints. And perhaps most poetic, the HOA funds were frozen, pending legal audit. No dues could be collected, no fines enforced, no power exercised. The board resigned en masse within a month. Karen tried to run a private petition to install a temporary transitional board, but nobody signed it. At the next community gathering organized by residents, not any authority, she wasn't even allowed to speak. A retired nurse named Linda took the mic and in front of 50 households said, "We lost trust the day you fined the man who tried to save us." She never said my name, but people turned and looked at me all the same. I didn't stand. I didn't wave. I just nodded once and kept my hands folded in my lap. Because I wasn't the hero in this story. I was just a man who couldn't stay quiet when the ground trembled. The lawsuits progressed fast. Elaine and her team submitted final reports to the city and the Public Utility Commission. The contractor Karen had hired turned out to be unlicensed, a side business run by a cousin of one of the former board members. The whole thing reeked of backdoor dealings and favored contracts. The city took over utility inspections for the entire neighborhood. Mandatory pressure tests were ordered for every gas, water, and sewer connection. City officials held a town hall in a rented church basement, not a single member of the old HOA board allowed to speak. And Karen, she moved out. One morning, a moving truck appeared in her driveway. A few neighbors stood across the street, arms folded, watching in silence as her furniture was loaded piece by piece. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't even look up. When the last box was gone, she got into a black SUV and pulled away from Silverbrook Crossing for good. No one waved. I thought I might feel triumphant when it happened, but I didn't. I just felt empty. Because justice, real justice, it doesn't come with confetti or applause. It comes with scorched ground, torn roots, and the knowledge that, if you hadn't spoken up more, would have burned. In the weeks that followed, something strange happened. People started knocking on my door, not with complaints or suspicions, but with thanks. Pies, handwritten cards. One kid even brought me a Lego model of a house with a little gas meter on the side. The same people who once called me paranoid now called me protector. It didn't fix everything. The neighborhood was still wounded. Some houses had cracked foundations. Some folks moved away. But there was no more HOA, just people. And sometimes, just sometimes, that's all a place needs. And me, I still walk my lawn every morning. Still listen. But the ground doesn't hum anymore. It's quiet, honest, alive. There's a kind of quiet that comes after fire. Not the silence of peace exactly, but the hush of something rebuilt from ash of lives, reassembling in the wreckage one breath at a time. That's the quiet I wake up to now. It's been 7 months since the explosion. The land where the clubhouse once stood is now just dirt. Charred soil, flattened and scraped clean by the city. A few orange cones still dot the perimeter, but the barricades are gone. The tape is gone. And most importantly, the power Karen's HOA held over this neighborhood is gone too. No more fines tucked into mailboxes, like threats in envelopes. No more clipped notes about mailbox colors or hedge lengths. No more fear. It took weeks for it to sink in, even for me. I still found myself checking the mailbox twice, expecting another certified letter accusing me of some violation. Still paused before walking across the HOA-maintained greenbelt, as if a clipboard might jump out from behind a shrub. But it never came, because they're not watching anymore. The city stepped in to temporarily manage the utilities and community infrastructure while a neighborhood vote was held. I didn't campaign. I didn't attend the first few meetings. I thought people might not want me there, still saw me as the man who started the war. But one night, I got a knock at the door. It was Linda, the retired nurse who'd spoken out during that first community meeting after the blast. She held a folded piece of paper in her hand. "They want you to chair the new resident advisory board," she said plainly. I blinked. Me. "You've already done more to protect this neighborhood than anyone ever elected." I laughed. Actually laughed. "You do remember they threatened to take my house, right? That's exactly why it should be you." I told her I'd think about it. She left the form on the table. I never sent it in. But I did start attending the meetings. I offered input on the new safety protocol, sat with Elaine. When she gave her final inspection debrief, even helped recommend a licensed firm to do long overdue utility mapping. The right way this time. But I didn't take a title, because I wasn't looking for control. I was just making sure no one ever had that kind of control again. Karen hasn't been back. Rumor is she moved to an upscale HOA downstate, one of those zero-lot line gated communities with marble fountains and bylaws longer than the Bible. I don't wish her ill. I don't wish her anything at all. I did, however, testify. When the state attorney general opened a case into HOA corruption and illegal infrastructure contracts, I was one of the first people on the witness list. I sat in a courthouse, hand steady voice, clear, and told the story, every detail, every warning I gave, every punishment I received for trying to be heard. The prosecutor called it a textbook case of community-level negligence, layered with intimidation tactics. I called it a slow-moving train crash. Everyone pretended not to see. When it was over, I walked out of the courtroom and into the sun. People clapped. Some offered hugs. A few reporters tried to chase me for comment, but I just kept walking. Because the thing is, I never wanted any of this. I didn't want the spotlight. I didn't want the lawsuits. I didn't want to become some reluctant local hero. I just wanted someone to listen. And eventually someone did. The city, the inspectors, the neighbors who once rolled their eyes and now wave from across the street. Even the woman 2 houses down, who once complained about the angle of my mailbox, now drops off banana bread every other Sunday. It's a strange feeling being seen. Not as a nuisance, not as a troublemaker, but as a neighbor. Sometimes I walk the same route I used when the ground was still humming. I stop near the garden. I kneel. I press my palm into the dirt. It's cool now. Still, silent. Like the land itself is healing. Like the danger has passed, and something new is allowed to grow. I planted a tree there last month. A red oak. Strong roots, steady canopy. Grows slow but lasts long. I didn't ask permission. Didn't need to. No board to find me. No Karen to send letters. Just the sound of wind through the leaves and the occasional laugh of a child riding by on a bike. That's what I fought for. Not revenge, not credit. Freedom. Freedom to live without fear of being punished for doing the right thing. Freedom to speak up and be taken seriously. Freedom to protect a community that others only saw as a collection of property lines. So when people ask me now, was it worth it? I tell them yes. Not because the fire was necessary, but because the silence afterward means no one else will have to raise their voice the way I did. Not if we stay awake. Not if we remember. And I do, every single day. Because my voice was ignored until it wasn't. And that made all the difference.